in just a minute once it loads on my screen. And pretty much ready to get rolling once a couple more speakers are in here. But Nick, what's up with you? We haven't had a chance to speak before on Spaces. Are you getting more into Twitter? What's going on there?
Yeah, it's a good question. Long time lurker, trying to get a little bit more into Twitter now that I'm like doing this writing thing. So uh, Basically, just trying to be a little bit more active on here. Follow like the venture capital startup stuff, a little bit of the finance stuff, but trying to see kind of what exists in Twitter as well in the sort of wine space.
Yeah, and within Twitter regarding the wine space, I know we're going to dive more into this, but has there been a warm reception? Are there a lot of fine wine people on here?
Yes, but there also, I think there are like some larger personalities that are a little more tech adjacent that work for companies and like compliance, for example. But in terms of like winemakers, for example, I think it's kind of hit or miss. You know, often like all there are some winemakers that I'll follow, they're not super active within the wine space specifically across the board, be it people in importation distribution, influencers, winemakers. Instagram is actually really really big.
Very interesting. Yeah, I can imagine with Instagram where you get that visual component that you would kind of have a little bit of better luck, right?
Yeah, yeah, definitely, and especially the sort of the wine space is a little weird, but especially with like the sort of younger generation, the next generation of people in the industry. Um, Instagram is really the big thing. It was basically it was a leap from email with the old industry and then Instagram with the new generation.
Love it, love it. All right, looks like we got stock market news in here too now. Tank dropped you a co-host invite. How's everything going?
Things are good. Just doing the usual, tweeting out everything, trying to think of jokes on the fly, tweeting from the different accounts, and excited to talk about wine. I wish it was a little bit later here on the West Coast so I could actually pour a glass and join in on the festivities, but have a long day ahead of me still.
Okay, yeah, that's pretty fair. All right, so for everybody that's in here, I went ahead and I tweeted out that we are live now, and I pinned that to the top of the space. Lee, I think you're on the Wolf account. If you want to throw that a retweet, that would be great, so we can go ahead and get more people. If any of the Beehive team, you want to share that out or just interact with it, we'll be able to get a little bit of a larger audience in here. But I think we are going to get rolling. We're about 5 minutes into the start now, and I will defer to you, Tyler. Do we want to start off with a little bit of background of Nick? Do we want to launch in with wine? How would you like to start from the top here?
Yeah, let's start with some background. I was rereading through the case study again right before this, which, by the way, blog.beehive.com, we have a bunch of case studies of like very cool creators doing things in the newsletter space, Nick being one of them. And I have to say, of all of the creators we have featured on these spotlights, one of the more interesting backgrounds and life and career pivots. So, would love to hear it from the man himself, kind of tell everyone what he has been up to the past few years and what got him into this space that he's in today.
Man, well, I appreciate the compliment. It's been a weird journey. If you ask anyone in the wine industry, like literally anyone at any level, the vast majority of them will tell you like they did not expect to be in the position that they're in at that moment. Like it's this weird thing that attracts people who are kind of generally curious, and then you just get deeper and deeper, deeper, and you're 2 years down the road, and you're like, oh shit, like I can't do anything else. So background with wine is kind of a little circuitous. I tried good wine for the first time when I was in college. I took a trip to Italy and like really realized what wine was, what it could be, that it wasn't something that came out of a box that you slap. And so basically I kind of had this passive interest, this kind of hobby for a few years. And after graduating college, started working at like this regional venture capital firm, a small role there. And as soon as the pandemic hit, I got laid off from that role. And it was kind of like this oh shit moment where I was like, I need to find a job, I need to find something, like I need to pivot from this pretty quickly. And I thought, if I'm going to work a day job, I'm going to work retail, I'm going to do something, like I may as well try and learn something new out of it. And so from that, basically emailed a bunch of local wine shops, said, hey, I'm going to try and learn really quickly. Like, I'm really interested in the space. Let me know if you need help. And so that's how I got like my first wine gig. And essentially what I would do is I'd start pulling bottles from the shop shelf while I was working, looking up the producer, the region, the grape. Then I'd buy the bottle, take it home, drink the whole thing, and read about the place that it came from. And so wash, rinse, repeat that entire process for about 6 months. And from there, I actually moved to a different wine shop, got deeper and deeper and deeper into this. And I was like, maybe I should just go for my sommelier and kind of get into that. And so while I was studying for that exam, I wanted to get a better idea of kind of how the industry operated, not just the product, because there's a lot of romanticism around wine as a product, but the industry is also fairly robust. And so I'd try to read, I'd basically just like search online, like, how does wine importation work? How does distribution work? How do these wines move from, a tiny farm in southern France all the way to a shop in the United States with several thousand SKUs of wines from all around the world? And so there was some information that I could get from there, but it was really lacking. There wasn't a lot there. And I finally actually reached out to one of the guys that I knew that was like starting his own distribution company. I was like, hey, how do you learn all this? Like, how do you learn how this works? And he said, there's no one place to go. And he said, literally, I had a mentor who for 6 months explained all the different intricacies of the industry, how everything works. And he was the only one who could do that for me because he had worked in it for so long. So that was my first moment of confusion about all of this. And then, the more I studied, the more I did kind of like this industry reading. And, I would be looking through some of these publications. I'd be looking through like industry reports, and it was all pretty lackluster in the sense that, with standard publications, they're kind of like magazines that are just publishing online, where you have one-off articles, and some of it's useful information, some of it's like an update, but a lot of it is, talking about tasting notes, trade fairs, things like that. And then you get into the big industry reports, which are extremely useful, very dense. To be honest, it's about as exciting as reading through like a 10K. But they would have a lot of really useful, actionable information, but they were only published once a year. And so you would have like this sort of loop where some of these publications, or rather these research reports, would say like, here's what happens last year, here's what's going on right now, here's what we predict for next year, and this is all the data to back it up. And then they do the same thing the next year. But the time in between was massive, and there wasn't a lot of analysis, I guess, being done in the interim. And so I was really just appalled by the information asymmetry in the industry, and I thought that it would be a really interesting opportunity to sort of insert myself into that niche or that gap. And that's kind of how Trinitas started.
Dope. And then I guess like in terms of like where you went first in terms of choosing newsletter versus YouTube versus podcast, or like as far as like being more of a media property and educating the space about what you're working on, how did you land on newsletter? What else did you consider? And then where do you think you're taking it from here?
I am awful in front of a camera, so that was off the table. And it's there's some podcasts out there, but again, I feel like the written format kind of lent itself to really the kinds of things that I wanted to talk about within wine, which is kind of industry and business analysis. And so writing was kind of the format that I felt most comfortable with. And so, starting out with all of this, I had no idea what I was doing. I essentially just Googled like best platforms for publishing a newsletter, and saw a bunch. I'd used MailChimp in the past and was kind of unimpressed by it, and eventually landed on ConvertKit just to try it out. And so, I'd done like the first couple months on ConvertKit, I think. And then I had seen, I think it was Liquidity's post about like their migration to Beehive. And I saw that and I was like, yes, that's everything that I'm looking for in terms of sort of content creation, monetization, or the ability to monetize, and then really building an audience as opposed to just sending a newsletter. So one of the things that was really cool to me was the fact that like you would have this online homepage as a sort of repository for all previous articles, in addition to like the newsletter that you send out on a regular basis. And so as soon as I did that, I did a little snooping around on like what Beehive was and what you guys were working on, and that's ultimately what it sold me.
What surprised you the most about the whole newsletter operation in terms of like aggregating the content, writing it, the responses and feedback you get? Being new to the newsletter space, kind of curious, like what stands out to you?
What stood out to me is like how much of a time suck it can't be, or how much of a time suck it can be if you're not like, for me starting out, it was it took a lot of time for me to figure out what I don't know. So to figure out all the steps in the process, or everything that it takes to write like a large piece and then convey the message that I'm trying to convey, to then edit it, then set it up to be sent out. The honestly, like the editing process was kind of caught me off guard. But then I was also surprised by I mean, with the help of Beehive, like how simple it was to really get a message out there, and also surprised by like how receptive some people were to like this, what I think is like this really niche topic.
But because it is so niche, how are you finding readers currently? Are you partnering with any other types of, I don't know, content publisher, or are you going to like trade shows? Is it your immediate network of people that you know are interested in the space? Or I guess, how are you finding your ideal reader given it is so niche?
Yeah, it's a good question. So starting out, and what I've continued to do recently is I started out with my own small network. I just sent them a ping. I sent them a message, said, hey, I'm working on this new thing. It might be mildly interesting to you. I basically told everyone I know in the wine space, or that was sort of adjacent to wine, that I was working on this kind of thing. And the people starting out who started to read it kind of on a regular basis, I would essentially ask them like, hey, if you know anyone who's interested, please tell them about it. And the cool thing about such a smaller space or a niche space, that there like 2 degrees of connection between everyone in the industry, and it's a lot of the big same voices. So asking for referrals is really helpful. And then this is kind of weird, and I don't know if it's unique to the wine space, but there are a few very large niche meme accounts on Instagram. And I saw that a couple of them had actually started reading it. So I essentially DM'd them and I said, hey, if you really like it, would you mind giving me a shout out? Like, it'd be a huge help and a big deal. And so far that's what I've done, and it's been working pretty well.
I'll hop in really quick. So just to backtrack a little bit, I think it's really interesting that you kind of talked about the challenges of actually learning the wine industry and like the process of finding good wine. Something I noticed about the majority, if not all of your content, is that it's not just focused on the actual wine. You're very heavily in tune with like the economy and the regulation around the current wine industry. How do you feel like it's been currently impacted and like the overall market right now with everything going on in like Russia? I know you talked a little bit about that and like just overall fertilizer and all that.
Yeah, definitely. So my background is loosely in economics, and so I really enjoy kind of writing about that. And I definitely stray away from the product, because there are plenty like I always compare it to like cooking. There are a million different blogs about what something tastes like, or how to make something. But so that's kind of what I'm trying to avoid. In terms of the impact on the global wine industry, there's a lot happening. So to try and sort of distill um, a lot of what's happening macroeconomically and its effect on the wine industry, the biggest thing right now is really energy prices. And so that's one of the things that I talked about, I think, in the most recent post I had, was that wine is still an agricultural product, and at the lowest, cheapest form, when you're talking about wines that are between like $4 and $10, it's an agricultural commodity. And so, what happens with a huge spike in energy prices and in monetary inflation is that you see a massive impact um, on all winemakers essentially. At the lowest level, they are most impacted by the increase in price of fertilizers because that's a huge input cost. They're also impacted in the same way that a grower of corn, wheat, or soy would be impacted by an increase in the price of fuels. So, to use machinery in the vineyard, to use machinery in the winery, and then to actually ship it out, all of that becomes substantially more expensive. And so there is, I mean, one of the biggest impacts is really one of economic instability, where winemakers essentially have to make decisions early on in the growing season that they essentially can't reverse or can't affect or can't change until the end of the growing season come harvest. So it's a really interesting bet to have to take in times of such great uncertainty. But even over the last 2 years, winemakers have been greatly affected by the like really supply chain issues. The biggest thing is that since it's becoming more difficult to import and export wines, it's just becoming more expensive. And the United States is the largest consumer of wine in the world. And so when it becomes more expensive or more difficult for French wine producers, for Italian wine producers to get their wines here, they're directly affected by that right away.
What's been your favorite post to write thus far? I'm scrolling through your archive, and it's like a pretty wide array of like the different topics and approaches you take. Is there anyone that jumps out at you as like a favorite or one that you found the most interesting?
Yeah. So my process for like selecting a topic is really chaotic. Essentially, what I'll do is I'll aggregate dozens and dozens of articles that published over the last few weeks to try and find something that is sort of consistent in either what's occurring or what's being written about, what's being reported on. And so not this most recent one, but the one before that, I think it's titled like A Canned Incantation. I was essentially like, I started out trying to write about alternative packaging formats, just kind of as a general interest. There's this huge wave of what people in the like beverage space call RTDs, ready to drink, where it's essentially like canned cocktails, wine coolers, and like low or no alcohol beverages in these cans that are essentially ready to go, as opposed to buying like a 750 milliliter bottle of Jack and Coke for a mixer. So I was interested in like these RTDs, and I was trying to just dive deeper into that. And then what it eventually became was, by the end of it, I realized that everyone was kind of progressing towards cans. Everyone was experimenting towards cans because they all sort of converged on these three trends that prefer these three trends that are really moving towards environmental sustainability, lower cost in packaging, and changing consumer preferences for like single serve stuff. And so I thought it was really funny. Like there's this concept of carcinization that basically says that in nature, all crustaceans want to be crabs. And like there's this circular evolution where all crustaceans, all crabs eventually evolve away and then back to a crab. And so that's kind of what we're seeing in like CPG for alcohol, is that everyone is moving towards cans, and it doesn't matter what the format is, what kind of alcohol, it's all cans, it's all aluminum. So that was a lot of fun.
How do you stay like up to date on all of like, I guess, like news around wine?
I have a list. I have a list of like probably 10 publications. Um, 10 publications that I'll go through every couple of days just to pick out the interesting articles. And then from those interesting ones, I'll kind of actually read through the ones that are either relevant to what's going on or sort of viable. The interesting thing about the wine industry at this stage in its development is it's still 10 years, 15 years behind, I think, the rest of the world in terms of industry development. But most of these sort of publications are at the point where there is a lot of aggregation, but not a lot of distillation. So there are like 2 or 3 resources that I use. One of them is called Wine Industry Insights, written by a guy named Louis Perdue. And he's one of a few people that's really good at just like going through all of the articles. And like his day job is essentially just making a list of things that are most interesting. And so I have help with some of the curation just in picking, and it helps me pick topics to really dive deeper into. And then from there, I'll start pulling from other resources. But it really is just manually going through dozens and dozens of articles in a given week.
And how much of your content is like aggregation versus original research and like going deep on a topic that may not be covered by another publication? Because like a lot of the newsletters that we see in Beehive and that are, I think, popular in general, like Morning Brew, Exec like a lot of these are content aggregators, and they sort in whether it's business news and finance or crypto and like what's happening in the space. Obviously, your most recent post is very like current events relevant with like the whole Russia-Ukraine situation and how it's impacting wine. Some of your other posts, like you mentioned, in like the cans and wine, is like more of like a deep dive in a particular topic. Are you just kind of like whatever content you think will resonate with your audience on any given week, you go deep in one area or another? How much of it is like current events based and aggregation? Kind of just curious about like the breakdown there, because it seems a little bit more fluid than most of the publications we see on Beehive.
Yeah, fluid is a very generous term. It's more like anarchy, honestly, when I'm writing this. So when I first started out, I kind of wanted it to be some form of aggregation where I would retell an interesting thing happening in that moment with maybe a little bit of insight at the bottom. And I thought that was a really great start for what this industry really needs. And then what it eventually becomes is, the deeper I dive into some of these articles, the more I become interested in like kind of what is causing this event at the time. So for some of these deep dives, it's not necessarily on purpose, but the more you dig, the deeper it goes. And so as I'm writing, if I can make some connection to a different trend or a different idea, it's something that I just really enjoy doing in the writing process. And so when we talk about like how I plan on really growing this thing to become a sort of major publication or a major resource in the wine space, what I'm trying to be more intentional about is actually clearly delineating one type of content from another. So building out the side that really is a little bit more aggregation with maybe some thoughts and connecting a few different ideas, and then sort of a completely separate side that does that deep dive, because there's still that element within the wine industry that is missing, of those deep dives on a regular basis that connect different ideas in a way that's actually actionable to someone that works in the space.
I have a question here. You mentioned earlier, you kind of made the comparison to reading the 10K, which I liked, and kind of got me thinking a little bit more about the business side of this. So, for people that are looking into fine wine, and maybe for people that are reading, even within your material that you're putting out, how often do you think it's for the purpose of consumption versus people that are actually making investments? Is there an economy here of people that are purchasing up, rare and different wines, maybe storing them for a number of years or arbitrage selling them? Is that something that exists?
That's a good question. It is something that is possible, and there are a few different things to unpack in that question. The first is that, like, the feedback that I've gotten from the conversations that I've had with some of my readers, the vast majority of whom like work in the industry, and it's generally interesting for them, but there are not many that are using that as a sort of platform or basis on which to make investments or make decisions in whatever business they might work in. That said, it's usable. The information is actually, from the research that I've done, it's actually good enough to make specific decisions depending on what you're doing in the industry. So for example, there is a single trend, a single piece that I think is really interesting, that is essentially this slow decline of production in Champagne and the butting in of other producers from different countries that are making sparkling wine in the Champagne method, but it's not Champagne. It's English sparkling wine, it's Australian sparkling wine, it's sparkling wine from California. It's very high quality, but they're slowly eating away at the market share. And so there are a few different ways to look at that. If you were a retailer, for example, and you're owning a boutique wine shop, you might see something from Trinita that says English sparkling wine is on the rise. It's becoming a lot more popular, and it's a great cheap alternative to Champagne, while at the same time consumer demand for Champagne is spiking, while at the same time Champagne is stuck on some shipping container in the Suez Canal, and no one is getting the allocation that they asked for. So if you're a retailer, you can make a decision like that. If you are a collector, for example, it's a bit of personal preference, but that's still actionable. So what you can do is, like, Champagne is not going to add any more land around that region that is legally allowed to be classified as Champagne, and that's what makes Champagne Champagne. So as demand increases for sparkling wine, and as the climate becomes less predictable around the world, that makes yields for grapes grown in any given vintage less predictable. And ultimately, that leads to typically lower supply. And that'll always push the price of Champagne up. So if you're a collector looking to just warehouse some bottles for yourself, that's really good to know that now is probably a really good time to warehouse some bottles. If you are a speculator, and investment in wine is a whole other thing. But if you're a speculator, for example, it is probably a safe bet that if you're warehousing a few different cases of the top 5 names in Champagne, those are guaranteed to appreciate in value. This is not investment advice.
Yeah. Definitely fair. There we go. The disclaimer, even in the wine space. Okay, so 2 things. One, for if anybody that's in the crowd, if you have any questions, first of all, I would recommend clicking into Nick's bio here, and you can click into trinitawine.beehive.com, which you can see right there, and you'll be able to see some of his recent articles and kind of pick through them. And we'd love if you have any questions you want to come up. It's actually super interesting stuff. Having just clicked through a few of them, you'll even see that there is stuff about government regulation around wine. There is upcoming events. There are really intricate and, there's like historical details around it as well. Just kind of breaking down this economy and everything that's going on here. Plus, for the fine wine drinker, giving you more than enough information to keep yourself busy up there. So absolutely feel free to come up and request if anyone does want to get in. I see Jack up here. I'll probably pull you in a second as well to get some thoughts and questions. In addition with that, you did see that I mentioned that it was hosted on beehive.com. For anyone who's unfamiliar, if you're in the crowd and haven't already checked this out, a lot of us lately have been moving our newsletters onto the Beehive stack. It has been the most effective way to get them out there. So I'm sure I'll ask Nick in just a second why you're using it, but I know that the Bullish Rippers newsletter goes through the Beehive. I know that there are a bunch of other newsletters, the Ram Capital newsletter, we had them on last week, and a bunch of others. Jack Rains is on here. And why are we doing this? It's pretty simple. It is absolutely, first off, just the easiest that we found that allows you to have great tools for sending out and also integrate into Twitter. So that's, for me, is just like right there. It's a no-brainer. Review is Twitter's system that is built into Twitter, but it is kind of a terrible product. There's not a whole lot that you're going to get with uploading your audience in there and having the right tools to interact with them. But with Beehive, you can actually integrate it right in, so you don't have that worry of not having that ability, and you can still then go ahead and have all the tools that you need. Plus, the best thing for me is the availability to the team, right? So we have the team right here, Tyler Dank, CEO and co-founder. We've got Aman on here as well, who's really running a ton of the operations there. So if you are a person that is in the crowd, writing a newsletter, interested in this, one, if you want to find new newsletters, of course, visit, Beehive and see what they're going on there. There's a bunch of people from Twitter and elsewhere that are hosting theirs on there. But in addition with that, if you're looking to write, and listen, it's always a good time to start a newsletter, to be honest, start driving people towards it. it's like, what if we had all started our Twitter accounts 5 years earlier and we had caught the swell and we had those audiences now? This is the time to get going with it, and Beehive is a super easy platform. So I've used the product myself. I've sent out multiple newsletters on there, reached out to people, even like announcements and things like that are super easy to send out. So it's great to be able to have the team on here, but also be able to mix in a bunch of different concepts, such as we've talked about fine wine, we've talked about putting a community on FinSwip, we've talked about monetization tools, and so much more that is going on in there. So real quick, Nick, before I go to Jack, I'll throw it over to you and just ask, like, how did you find Beehive? What made you say, this is where I'm going to push it out through, this is where I'm going to work on versus any other services?
Yeah, so I was looking for something like Beehive before I knew that Beehive existed. And I think that my knowledge at the time, or my understanding, my sort of goal was, this can't be just another newsletter. Like there are 1,000 newsletters out there in the wine space. Some of them are dedicated to the sort of economic side of it. But it has to be more functional and more compelling. And the future of publication, generally speaking, to me, is in building communities. And I was looking for the thing that would essentially take me far beyond most of the current sort of platforms out there. And I point out like Mailchimp and ConvertKit pretty often, only because those they serve a very specific need, but it's a very limited need. It's just dissemination of information rather than starting a conversation or building a community. And so I really wanted to be able to do that. And then, I was looking at, I'm not very technologically literate in the sense that like I can't build out some of these tools on my own. And so I was looking for something that would allow me to sort of establish an online presence while also publishing at the same time, while hopefully eventually being able to integrate some sort of referral program. And this was actually before I knew about beehives, while also not taking 10% of future revenue. And so I think I may have mentioned it, like I discovered Beehive through a liquidity post, essentially, talking about their transition. And from there, basically, I just looked into the service itself. I was checking out the founding team and their credentials, and I was sold right away.
Yeah, that's perfect. And for anyone who doesn't know the story, I'm sure you've all heard about Morning Brew, very popular, millions and millions of readers, $80 million plus business. Tyler was, I believe, the first employee there, really worked on building out and scaling all those systems that they have. If anybody's read the Morning Brew, it's really obvious to see why it operates. It's a great layout. They have, great writing, but also they have a ton of sponsors that are easily integrated. It's clear that there's a lot of behind the scenes systems, but those aren't available to most people who are trying to build out a newsletter. So what Beehive does is it really is, Tyler, taking a lot of those tools and then recreating them as something for the creator to use on their end. So love it, Nick. Great piece there. Tyler, anything you want to say before we hop to Jack?
Well, first off, if anyone has questions for Nick, I know we're going to Jack in a second, but feel free to ask questions. Seems like Nick is the guy for wine and has a ton of knowledge there. Second, Wolf, Gav, you're getting better at my pitch than I am. So after doing 6 of these spaces, it seems that you know what to say and in terms of what Beehive offers and the backstory. But more or less, I was the second employee at Morning Brew, and me and my 2 co-founders, Ben and Jake, along with a few others, built out a ton of the internal tech and infrastructure, from the website to the email template to the referral program to a custom CMS and an ad management platform, all to say that what Morning Brew had, I mean, people receive it at 6 a.m. They spend 5 minutes reading it. Behind the scenes, there was a totally bespoke tech ecosystem kind of fueling our growth and our content operations and our monetization. And any individual content creator who wanted a newsletter, it was difficult for them, especially if they were not technical, to be able to have those same capabilities and plug into a system that allows them to focus on what they should be focusing on, which is creating content and good content, and abstracting all of the technical difficulties of scaling, understanding where the subscribers are coming from, integrating a referral program, inserting advertisements, best in class email deliverability. So that's really the premise of Beehive, is how can we build the best of what the newsletter ecosystem has to offer and make it super seamless to use and plug in, and create high quality newsletters so you can focus on creating content like Trinita Wine and what Nick's been working on, or what Jack's been working on as well with his publication. So with that bit of context, we can kick it over to Jack if you have a question for Nick or want to add to the conversation.
Appreciate it, Tyler. Yes, I do have one very specific wine question for you, Nick. Is there any truth to checking wine legs, or is that just some bullshit that gets regurgitated in the wine industry? I did a wine tasting thing in Bordeaux when I was 19, and I just thought the whole thing was made up. But I've been wondering that for like 6 years now.
That's a great question. And if we want to spend the rest of this session just dispelling wine myths, I'm happy to do that too. I love these conversations. So there are a lot of myths in the wine industry because like it's shrouded in all of this prestige and mystery because sommeliers are kind of assholes and it makes them feel better about themselves. And so that said, there's a thing to legs, and it's no indication of quality. You usually see legs on wine, and some people call them tears. It's essentially like the thicker droplets that slowly move down the inside of the glass after you swirl it. It's usually an indication of higher alcohol or higher sugar content. So with sweet wines, you'll see legs on like white dessert wines for sweet wines. And in big, bold red wines, you'll see legs. It's no indication of quality. You can have a janky ass $12 bottle of Cabernet that's all alcohol with nothing else and completely out of balance, and it'll have legs. And you'll see that staining, that tearing.
So you're saying since I'm going on a date to a renowned tapas place tonight, I should act like there's something to it, even though there's not really anything to it quality-wise?
So I worked in hospitality for a little while, in addition to retail as a hom at a wine bar. And wine is all about bluffing. I don't care what anyone tells you. If you say it more confidently, you could be speaking to a master sommelier with 5 minutes of reading into the wine industry. If you say something confidently enough, they're going to question themselves for a moment.
Noted. That is the best wine advice I've ever gotten. Thank you.
Of course.
While we're on the topic of wine myths, is there another one that jumps out at you, Nick, that's like the biggest myth in the wine industry, or for the wine schmucks who claim that they know everything about wine? Like, lay some additional information on us.
Absolutely. So there's a lot, but the two biggest ones are obsessions with vintage, that older means better. And I don't know why this has come up so many times, and I don't know if this is just like I happen to hear this a lot, but the dimple, the bunt in the bottom of the glass, or in the bottom of the bottle, sorry, that is somehow meaningful, and it's really not. So with the bottle, I've heard people say, the deeper the bunt or like the thicker the glass of the bottle, the higher quality the wine is. That's not true at all. The only reason for the bunt is actually to make the bottle more stable when it's sitting on the table. It's absolutely meaningless otherwise. And thickness of the glass is also meaningless. Oftentimes what I've seen, and this is not a hard and fast rule, but oftentimes what I've seen is really low quality producers use thicker glass because there's an association with glass and weight in quality. And so that's absolutely meaningless. And then the other thing sorry, I'm drawing a blank here. What was the first thing I said?
We're talking width, we're talking thickness of glass, we're talking
Talk about the dimple.
Okay, so dimple first, and then other common misconception about vintage. Older is not always better. The sort of obsession with old wine kind of came about several hundred years ago, back when winemaking was still pretty primitive. And you can make wine in an old school way, but we know so much more that we can now control for different variables to make wine the best quality possible, regardless of the conditions of the vintage of the growing season. And so several hundred years ago, you would have wines out of Bordeaux that were ageable for 25, 30 years in the same way that they're ageable for 25, 30, 40 years now. But it's just that they were undrinkable when it was early on, because the winemaking was just different. It was less sophisticated. We couldn't make good drinkable wine that from a place like Bordeaux, where you would even want to open it within the first 10 years. So the vast majority of wine that you're going to come across now of $50 or less is going to be absolutely incredible if you open it the day you buy it. And it might be a little bit better, a little bit different if you sit on it for 5 to 10 years. I mean, it differs based on different grapes, different producers, different regions. But for the most part, like there's no reason to obsess over vintage because it's going to be good either way.
I'm looking through your archive of posts, and I actually have on my shelf in my living room a wine bottle with Snoop Dogg's face on it. And I see that you did a post
Boy, oh
kind
boy.
of about his wine, and then just
Yeah.
other celebrities that have wines. One, like, is that wine any good at all, or did I get ripped off and just buy it because his face was on it, which is true. And like, also curious, like, other celebrities that have kind of moved into the wine space. I know a lot of celebrities have moved into tequila and other types of alcohol. But just kind of curious from your perspective of what celebrities or athletes, musicians, whatever, have made a successful transition into like the wine industry, and which are actually good quality wines and which ones are kind of not great whatsoever.
Yeah, definitely. So wine is what you want it to be. So I like I'll talk shit about wines sometimes because I think it's funny. But if you like it, you drink it. It doesn't matter if it's $4 or 400. If you like it, you drink it. So I won't shit on Snoop Dogg's wine. That was easily one of the greatest marketing efforts in the wine industry um, in this century. Honestly, in the last 20 years, um, Treasury Wine Estates, which is the parent company of 19 Crimes, was essentially able to enter a crowded market dominated by local producers in California and carve out a substantial space for themselves. So huge respect to Treasury Wine Estates. The 19 Crimes Snoop Dogg Cali Red is like quality wise pretty average, which is not a bad thing. It's a great kind of like everyday table wine. But I have friends who swear by it, who are absolutely in love with it. So I definitely don't hit on that. So let's see what else.
What about the Fat Jewish's Babe, right?
Yeah, so there are a few producers, I would say. So the vast majority of celebrities that are getting into the wine space are partnering with a large winery. They're partnering with a distribution network, and they're putting the face on the bottle, which is a business model that works really, really well because they're essentially just taking a cut. They assume some ownership of the business, but for the most part, they're taking a cut for having their face on the bottle. There are a few different wines that have done it really well. Um, Post Malone's My Song Number 9 Rosé, solid rosé from southern France, out of Provence. Um, Pretty good. And again, their marketing is phenomenal. I think they've done a really good job there. Another one, I don't know if you guys have seen this, but back when Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie were still married, they actually started a wine brand together, Chateau Miraval, also in southern France. They do both like a standard rosé and then like they'll also, I think they also have like a legit champagne. Brad Pitt has a legit champagne. That's good. That's solid. But I would say the absolute king of celebrity wine brands is Jay-Z's. Um, Jay-Z's champagne brand. I think it's called. It's a French name. It's like Brignand de Armagnac, something like that. Um, Absolutely phenomenal. It's a really great story. Jay-Z used to rep. They used to rep Cristal champagne the same way that like P Diddy had Ciroc. And basically, like one of the export managers for Cristal said, "We don't like our brand being associated with Jay Z," and so Jay Z essentially burned that relationship to the ground. Cristal took a huge hit in sales as a result of that, and kind of faded into obscurity. And then Jay Z started his own champagne brand through a partnership with a producer in France. I believe that was early 2000s, and last year he sold it to LVMH, Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy, for $350 million. I mean, just the king of quality and branding. Like even like master sommeliers will give that wine credit for its quality.
How's your French since you've been working in this space?
Oh my God, even worse. It's so bad. The Italian's like a little bit better, but my French is garbage because like I'll fixate on the pronunciation of one word and then assume that that grouping of letters makes the same sound in a different word, and it just doesn't. And I think me and the French language can take 50-50 blame for that one because it is ridiculous.
Go ahead, Iman.
Oh, I was just gonna say I've seen this done on YouTube where like creators will kind of rate products based on like, so in this case we can do like, if Nick you wanna give us your picks for like top wine, let's say like regardless of cost, and then let's do most reasonable, so cost and quality, and then
Hmm.
just one to avoid at all costs, like absolutely disgusting, don't touch it, and then one that's just super overrated.
Absolutely. This is great. I live for this stuff. So I'm going to give you like a couple different names and then just wine regions in general. So overrated across the board, bar none. Granted, with these overrated wines, the best marketing I've ever seen on a product. So I always have to lend credence to the marketing because the branding is phenomenally done for these products for a really underwhelming thing. So most overrated, Santa Margherita Pinot Grigio. Um, Really, I don't know how much of a household name it is, but I've seen like I'll follow some wine influencers just to kind of see what they're doing in the world of wine. Santa Margherita Pinot Grigio, I know, is a really big one. It's like $20 to $25 retail. I can guarantee you that the vineyard sells it to an importer for $3 to $4. It's worth maybe 10 to 12 on the shelf. Like that's the maximum I would pay for it. You can get much better Pinot Grigio for 10 to 15. So Santa Margarita is the big one, and then the other one is unfortunately the one that everyone knows and loves is the Prisoner Red Blend. Um, it's well made, but it's just wildly overpriced. So for people who say they like Prisoner, it's out of Northern California. It's really popular. You'll find it on most restaurant lists. Um, at the restaurant, it's going for like $85. It's going for like 45 to 50 retail. You can get really, really good bottle from France or even from California that's $30. That's way better. For great value wines, uh, kind of depends on what you prefer in terms of taste. There are a few different regions that I'm really excited about. If you like California Cabernet, I always recommend Chilean Cabernet. A lot of the stuff that comes out of like the Central Valley, more specifically like Colchagua Valley, is phenomenal for the price. You'll usually get something for like $15 for a bottle, and it punches above the $30 price point out of California. It's just fantastic. And then I would always also say like um, southern France is having this sort of revolution in winemaking where they've had um, they've had a really primitive winemaking industry. The region's called Languedoc. It's basically the entire southern French coast, Languedoc and Provence primarily. But a lot of these winemakers have been upping their game in terms of technology and market access. And so they're creating really, really high quality wines that don't have the weight of the brand name and price associated with pretty much every other region in France. So if you like Cote de Rhone blends, you'll love red blends from Languedoc in southern France. And then best bottle or best wine across the board is unfortunately French. It's probably white Burgundy. Chardonnay from Burgundy is phenomenal. If you're willing to go to a wine store and drop between $100 and $200 on a bottle of white Burgundy, it's for me life changing. It's absolutely phenomenal.
I think that might be my biggest not that I'm really in the market to spend $100 to $200 on a bottle of wine on any given night, but anything that you would describe as a life changing is probably one of my biggest takeaways from this conversation. So I made note of that.
Honestly, and I mean, you guys say the word. I can make a small list for people if anyone's actually interested of like life-changing wines, especially the ones that are sort of slept on from smaller regions that don't get as much press or publicity. There's just some amazing stuff out there, and it's if you talk to people in the wine industry, all of them will tell you like I have a bottle that changed my life about wine, and I can tell you the exact bottle, the vintage, and what I was doing at the time. Like it's a real oh shit moment.
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely in the business of promoting and tweeting high quality content, and that seems as high quality as it gets. So if you want to
Outstanding.
create that list of life changing wine, we'll definitely shoot that out from the Beehive account and retweet it to all the relevant accounts.
Beautiful. Happy to do that for you guys.
Did not have that on our quarterly growth strategy, but I think that's a great idea. So I'm all in.
Perfect.
Iman, did you have a question?
I just wanted to ask, like, before we close off, just any advice that you have for other writers starting out with a newsletter, or just some of the things that you've learned along the way that you can share.
Yeah, definitely. I have this theory about writing newsletters that is essentially the newsletter space is kind of like YouTube in its early days, and I say early like I probably like mid or early 2010s maybe, but essentially that YouTube, I think at the time probably seemed like with all of these YouTube influencers, it seemed like a bit of a bubble with the number of people on the platform doing literally the exact same thing. So you would see like there would be some sort of trend or challenge that emerges. Everyone does the exact same thing. The jump cuts, the formatting is even pretty similar. And yet there were still, dozens, if not hundreds of personalities that rose from that had tens of millions of followers. And the reason for that is because people fall in love when you're creating something like this. People fall in love with the person, the personality, the voice, not necessarily the content specifically. The content is a draw, but what people fall in love with is who you are and the way you see the world. And so that's what I would say to anyone just starting out, because I'm still just starting out, is the most important thing to me is to find your voice and be as authentically yourself as possible, and that's how you find the people like you.